Welcome back, students. It is me, once again, your professor, Dr. Wes Jamison, back with another very, very quick lesson on macroeconomics. I hope that your exam earlier this week went well for you. Looking at some of the grades, it looked like you guys did phenomenal. It is summer. It is hot. I am absolutely burning up in this heat, but without further ado, we have another banging lesson for you today. Very, very quick. It's probably the shortest lesson in the entire book. We're going to hit on economic growth, macroeconomic growth. Without further ado, let's get into it. Once again, we are talking about economic growth. And look, what this is all about, again, we're going to hit on the exact same thing that we've been hitting on for the last 5 weeks, and that is gross domestic product. In other words, GDP. In other words, like I put it, your nation's yearly paycheck, right? We are going to see this is pretty much your entire output, all the grains of rice, all the chairs sold, all the food and services all together sold in a year. And this is what gross domestic product has looked like over the last 75 years. And you can see here that with the exception of just a few blips, namely, we got one right here, and we have a really big one right here. Most of the last 75 years of American history, we have seen nothing but increases in gross domestic product. Now, what do we call economic growth? How would we define economic growth? Well, it is easy. There are essentially, there's three things I kind of want you to know about the definition of economic growth. Number one is that it's a process, that it takes time. Number two, it takes time. And number three, what we're talking about when we mean economic growth, we are defining this as the economy's ability to produce. And of course, and this should be just a growth implies increase. And so what we are looking for in this GDP is, of course, this increasing number. We want to see year on year increase. We call this economic growth. Now, this graph that we're looking at right here, there's one thing that, I'm looking at this and I'm like, oh my gosh, well, that seems to be going up. And that leads us to a question. Can we increase output forever? And it is a very, very good question. It is something that we should think about, especially when we see a graph that looks like this, because it looks like there's no stopping this train. So can we increase output forever? The answer is sure. Sure, we can increase output forever, or at least many economists think so. Now, again, before I go too far into this, there are some economists out there, very few, to be honest with you, and a lot of people will call them chicken littles, that the sky is falling down, but there's some out there, maybe me, but some say that this eternal growth could not last forever. But I want to stick to this and just say, sure, we can keep increasing if we meet a few factors, and I want to give them to you 1, 2, 3, okay? The first factor, of course, is population growth. In order for this is just one, in order for our economy to keep growing, we as a people, as a population, also must keep growing. It is the easiest way to increase your economy, the size of your economy. Now, here's the thing, it's not the only way, but it is certainly the easiest way. Now, this leads to a tiny little problem here in America, and namely that's, we are no longer in the 50s and 60s where families are making, a lot of children. It would seem that over, the last 40, 50 years, we have kind of fallen off what we call replacement rate. Essentially, replacement rate would mean maintaining the exact same population over time. If you want an increased population, you would need to be over this line. But you can see here, we are not exactly gaining in population. And so that would lead us to yet another factor that could increase and keep us increasing over time. Number two would be production growth. If we're not going to have more people, the people in our country will need to produce more. And thankfully, this has been the case. If we look at this graph, and this is indexed to 1979, but is from 1979 all the way to now, and look, this line right here is our productivity. We have gained more and more and more productivity over time. It's incredible. It's almost like they can just keep squeezing us and we will continue to keep producing whatever they're asking us to. But there is a small problem. There's a small problem here. Now, what you see here is also real median wages. And basically what this graph is telling us is that yes, inflation has happened, and yes, people are making more now than they were back in the 80s, but in real time, if we were to index it and think about what they were making in 1979, our wages have not really increased that much, and yet they have asked us to do more and more and more, and we have continued to produce more and more and more. The question you might need to ask yourself is, how long can we continue to do this? Now, the third factor I would want you to know is that we need to keep this growth slow and steady. If we keep it slow and steady, we may be able to mitigate such problems as a low birth rate, or maybe a year where we're not producing as much. But if we can keep both of these within check, we might be able to continue producing forever. But I want to just want to point out this graph one more time. This seems to be slow and steady growth right here. That is slow and steady growth. But then, I don't know, something seems to be happening right here. And then something seems to be happening even stronger right here. And then something seems to be even stronger right here. Many people would call this an exponential growth curve. Now, the problem with the exponential growth curve is it will continue to increase. And this slow and steady growth will no longer be slow and steady after a time. Now, this brings us to my boy Malthus. And again, he had a big problem back in the day, and I think it's very interesting. I just bring up him to prove one point. He had this problem when he looked at growth rates, linear versus exponential. And here's his problem. Here's what he had. Here's his basic theory. He says that, look, the way we're growing in population, and this is way back in the day, he's outstripping what we have for resources. He basically said that we're growing so quickly in population that eventually we will not have the food to feed the population. There'll be mass starvation, absolute mass starvation. Now, here's the thing. Malthus obviously got it wrong. There wasn't mass starvation, although there was, some bad leadership in China and, maybe some bad leadership in, the Soviet Union at the time. There was some communist things, and a lot of people did die of starvation. However, most of the time, this is what we saw. And look, there's a very good explanation for all of this. Look, this is where Malthus got it wrong. Yes, the world is growing in population. And yes, we are growing in production over population, even as though land area to grow things seems to keep shrinking. And the reason for this is the X factor. The X factor that it's not 1, 2, or 3. We're going to call this the X factor that could lead to economic growth. And that is, my friends, technology. We were able to figure out, better fertilizers. We were able to use hydroponic growing, so we didn't need as much land. There was many different factors that technology led us to that allowed us to grow more food and save our population. Now, economic growth across the world has continued to grow. But the question, of course, is how long can this continue? Now, that is a question that I leave to you. But what could our technology lead us to that could lead to answers in the future that could lead to continued growth? Right now, a lot of people say that artificial intelligence is the new technologically advanced breakthrough that will lead us to even greater heights. I leave that question to you. Next week, we get a very fun topic. We're going to be talking about money creation. I will be honest with you, I have a lot of thoughts on money creation, and I cannot wait to share them with you. I will see you next week. Make sure you do your homework assignment, and I will see you guys back here next week. I am out.